What's up guys, welcome to the mainliest totem build in Path of Exile, the Blood Magic Dual Flame Totem Marauder. Flame totems are, as of now, really strong, and if you like this kind of playstyle, then I think you'll enjoy this build as well. I've had lots of fun with it, at least. I hope you guys enjoyed, thank you for watching. What's up guys, Lifting Nerdbro here. In this video I'm going to show you one of my absolute favorite Marauder builds that can be used by both beginners and veterans to the game. It is the Double Flame Totem Blood Magic Marauder build. And this build is suited for both softcore and hardcore play. I personally played this on hardcore and I managed to stay alive while having a great clear speed in maps and endgame content. This build is incredibly strong compared to the currency you have to invest into it. Flame Totem is one of those skills that scales really well with just more levels, and it only requires 3 support gems to become very strong. Later on, if you have the currency, you can greatly increase the power of the build by getting yourself a 5 or 6 linked chest and adding in 2 additional support skill gems. The amount of currency needed to reach endgame of course varies on how lucky you are with the gear you find on the way, but in general you can make the build endgame viable for about 20 to 30 chaos orbs, which, as you might know, is very cheap and very manageable if you make good use of the chaos orb recipe. So let me give you a little introduction to the build. The defensive powers of this character lies in having a ton of life, armor, a good amount of block chains and lots of life regeneration. Additionally, we are using an Immortal Call cast when damage taken skill gem setup, and I will show you that later. For this build we're also using a Granite Flask to further boost our armor count to make us even tankier. This build uses the Blood Magic Keystone, which means that instead of mana we will be fueling our skill costs through our life pool instead. The benefit of using Blood Magic is that it allows you to focus on what's really important for this build, life and damage. Since Auras doesn't affect totems, we don't have to waste skill points on getting additional Aura skill nodes, and instead we are going to use those points to increase our damage and survivability. If you decide to take this build to the really late part of the game, this build will end up having a whopping 179% increased total maximum life. To put it simply, the great amount of HP, block chains, armor and the Granite Flask is going to make us very tanky. And since we're using totems, reflect damage is never a problem, which of course is nice not having to worry about. Totems will, however, reflect elemental damage back onto themselves, but that's easily countered by just summoning a new totem. The offensive powers and main damage of this build lies in the use of a Flame Totem, obviously. To make our totems deal more damage, we're also using the Curse Flammability to lower our enemies' resistances to fire, which, to put it simply, results in us dealing more damage. For this build we're also picking up the Keynote Ancestral Bond. This keynote allows us to have 2 totems up at a time, but in turn it also prevents us from using any attacks or casting spells. If you want, you can still use traps or mines, however it is not something that I did with this build, as it really isn't necessary. The damage from the totems is more than enough. Ancestral Bond basically doubles our damage output, and we now not only have 1 powerful flame totem, we have 2. Trust me, it's all worth it. Okay, so let me show you the skill gem setup we use for this character. For direct damage we are using Flame Totem, linked with faster casting, fire penetration, added chaos damage and greater multiple projectiles. Faster casting, fire penetration and added chaos damage all directly or indirectly increases the totem's damage. Greater multiple projectiles will make the totem cast 5 fire beams instead of 1. All of these beams will deal the amount of damage you see on the tooltip right here, and it does that each second. Added up, that is 6,827 damage per second, but don't forget that we're using Ancestral Bond and we can summon an additional totem. This basically means that you can double the amount of damage, which leaves us with 13,654 damage per second, and remember this character is only level 73. If you were to complete the build, and I will show you how to do that, you would end up with a lot more damage. If you eventually get yourself a 6 linked chest, I would recommend adding the faster projectiles skill gem as well. Not only will it increase your damage, it will also greatly increase the range of the fire beams our totems are shooting. If you want something different though, then the knockback skill gem can be quite funny to use as well, but that's up to you. If you only have a 4-link chest armor, then I recommend taking out the added chaos damage and only using greater multiple projectiles, faster casting and fire penetration with Flame Totem. Our flammability curse is linked with increased duration and faster casting. Faster casting and increased duration are not necessary, but they are both like a quality of life improvement for the build. And you could, instead of faster casting, choose to use the increased area of effect skill gem instead if you prefer. To improve the defenses of this character, we are using cast when damage taken linked with Enduring Cry, Immortal Call and increased duration. Cast when damage taken needs to be leveled to level 9, Enduring Cry level 10, Immortal Call level 9 and increased duration level 20. But as you can see, I haven't gotten to that yet myself. Besides this skill gem setup, we are actually also using another cast when damage taken skill gem setup for our build. And this works a little different. Here we are using cast when damage taken linked with Summon Skeletons, Molten Shell and Enfeeble. In this case, cast when damage taken needs to be leveled to level 9, Summon Skeletons until level 12, Molten Shell level 12 and Enfeeble level 10. These two cast when damage taken skill gem setups works in two different ways. The one with Immortal Call linked to it works by saving us from those really heavy hitting attacks that would normally either kill or bring us down to really low HP. When that happens, Immortal Call will proc and make us immune to physical damage for a few seconds, depending on the level of your increased duration skill gem. In that time we can easily heal up and move to a safer area and kill the mofo that thought he was allowed to hit us for that much damage. The other cast when damage taken skill gem setup does not block or make us immune like Immortal Call. It does, however, greatly reduce the amount of incoming damage we're going to take for about 10 seconds after it procs. It does this in 3 ways. 1, by increasing our armor by a small amount with Molten Shell. 2, by casting Enfeeble onto nearby enemies and thus reducing the amount of damage, both physical, elemental and chaos damage they deal. And 3, by summoning a few skeletons as decoys. The summon skeletons is a little gimmicky, but when you play around with it, it actually makes a difference that is worth considering. If you prefer, you can instead use Frost Wall, which will make projectiles unable to hit you if the wall blocks from the right direction, or you can choose whatever other skill gem you prefer. It is entirely up to you if you want to implement the last cast when damage taking skill gem setup, but I feel like it makes a great difference, at least until you get some awesome gear with lots of armor. At that time you may want to consider switching to something else. I should note here that if you're farming content below Merciless Piety level, then it is probably a good idea to keep your cast when damage taking skill gem setups at a lower level so that they will proc more often. But that is something you'll have to judge for yourself when playing. For extra mobility we're using Lightning Warp linked with faster casting and reduced duration. Faster casting and reduced duration will basically just allow us to cast Lightning Warp a lot faster. It is a pretty common skill gem setup, and if you guys have seen my other build guide videos, you will have noticed that I use this skill gem in lots of situations for lots of builds, and this is not the exception. Okay, so let me show you the skill tree. And remember that the things we want for this build is survivability through having a high life pool, armor and block chains. And to boost our damage we want either spell, elemental, totem or fire damage. Try to keep that in mind as I show you how I recommend you spend your skill points, as it will make much more sense then. Since we don't care about melee damage, the natural way for us to start progressing through the skill tree is by picking up these 5 life and armor skill nodes and then pick up this pretty sweet notable Warrior's Blood. Since we're using blood magic to fuel our skills, life regeneration now becomes even more important, and the Warrior's Blood is actually the notable in all of the skill tree that gives the most life regeneration, so that is of course very nice. From here on we're going to pick up even more life by picking up and heading towards Heart of the Warrior for a nice flat increase of life and strength, and then down towards Diamond Skin for those elemental resistances where we are going to continue outwards and pick up these fire resistance skill nodes as well. From here we will start moving down towards and picking up the blood magic keystone by taking this route. When you pick up this keystone, you will lose all your mana, you will have 0 mana, but instead you will start using life to fuel your skills. Next we're going to continue from up here and start to pave the way for Ancestral Bond so that we can pick up this keystone as soon as we reach level 31 and can start using our Flame Totem. Until then we're going to start paving another way to the next cluster of totem skill nodes that I recommend you pick up for this build. We're doing that by going this way and picking up these strength skill nodes. On our way we're also going to pick up the Ancestral Knowledge notable that will grant us 30 additional intellect, which we're going to need to level up some of our skill gems for this build. If you get enough intellect on your gear later on in the game, you can then spec out of this point and use it on something differently. We're then going to pick up Barbarism for that nice increase to our total life and that 1+ to maximum fire resistances. And then it is now time to pick up Ancestral Bond. If you have completed all the skill point awarding quests on normal difficulty, then you should be level 31 when you pick up Ancestral Bond if you have been following my recommendations. Great timing, as you can now use your Flame Totem as well. And you don't want to pick up this 8% totem damage skill node, and the reason for this is that there are far more efficient skill nodes throughout the skill tree that we will be picking up to increase our damage instead. Okay, so now that we can finally use Flame Totem and Ancestral Bond, it is time to increase the durability and damage output of our totems so that we can grill those mobs even faster. To do that, we're going to head down towards the Blood Magic Keystone again. Here we're going to pick up the Strength skill node and then continue to pick up this Totem Attack, Cast and Placement Speed skill node, then the 8% Totem Damage skill node, and finally this awesome totem notable Ironwood, which will make our totems deal more damage and make them a lot tankier. The reason we this time pick up the 8% Totem Damage skill node is that the alternative is faster summoning speed for our totems, and while that is useful, it is not needed since we'll be getting enough of that from another notable later on. To make our totems even stronger, we're going to continue from our previously paved road and into Totemic Mastery. For this totem wheel, we're going to stack to the left side and pick up the skill nodes that will make our totems tankier, and then pick up Totemic Mastery for that nice bonus to both damage and survivability for our totems. Again, we're not picking up the 8% totem damage skill nodes, as we can choose other skill nodes that are better throughout the skill tree. From here on, we will pick up some additional life skill nodes, including the awesome Constitution notable you see here, which is one of the absolute strongest life notables in the game. We're then going to pick up Sentinel for some increased armor and evasion, along with 10% to all elemental resistances. And remember that I said we would pick up some increased totem summoning speed later on? This is now the time, and there is no better way to get this than by picking up Totemic Seal. To reach that notable, we're going through this pretty awesome life and duration totem skill node and the cast and attack speed skill node. Remember that cast speed is great for Flame Totem, so every time we pick up a skill node such as this one, we're getting a nice boost to our damage as well. Now let's pick up some more life and blockchains. We're going to do that by going through this shield wheel, where we will be picking up the 2 skill nodes that grant us additional increased armor from our equipped shield, and then we are of course going to pick up plated defenses. These 2 skill nodes and notable greatly increases the amount of armor you gain from your shield, and that is why your shield is going to be one of the most important pieces of equipment for your character. But we are going to talk about that later as well. From here on, you should pick up the additional 2% chance to block node and then move into the Templars area and pick up all of the life nodes, including the life regen skill node. It should be said, however, that the life regen skill node is optional, but since we're using blood magic, I recommend picking it up. To get even more life regen and damage, we're going to head down towards the blood magic keystone again. Down here we're going to pick up these awesome fire damage skill nodes and including the perfectly tailored for our needs Arsonist notable. Fire damage obviously increases the damage of our flame totem, and the 1% additional life regen is great for this build as well. We're now going to head towards the last totem skill nodes for this build, and on our way we are going to pick up Shaper for that increased life regen. After that we will pick up the attack and cast speed skill node and the Shamanistic Fury notables for a nice boost for our totems. After that we're going to pick up agility for that 30 extra dexterity, which we greatly require for this build. By now we should pick up some more life, and we have 3 great life nodes down by the blood magic keystone. Let's pick them up. After that we're going to head back to the top of the skill tree and move into the witch area. In here we're going to pick up the 2 life skill nodes and the notable cruel preparation. At this point in time I will recommend getting yourself some more damage mitigation by picking up the shield notable Aegis and the 1 remaining 2% increased blockchain skill node. After that we want to pick up these awesome life and flask nodes over here next to the ranger's starting area. And people have a tendency to underestimate flask nodes, and I find myself saying this in almost every build video that I'm making, that it is a huge mistake to underestimate these. Not only does these skill nodes grant you 15% increased life, but any life flask you use will give you 60% more life every time you use it. That is a very strong buff to your character's survivability. Any good Path of Exile player will tell you that the use of flasks is one of the things that determines how well you will do in the later parts of the game if you want to survive. When we have picked up these life and flask skill nodes, I recommend picking up the last damage skill nodes for our build. To do that we have to go to the top of the tree again and pick up these 4 damage skill nodes, and then finally the harder flame notable for a substantial increase in damage for our flame totem. At this point in time the build is basically finished, but if you want to continue further and invest some more skill points, then I would recommend picking up some additional life by picking athleticism and the 2 life nodes here. And then lastly the command of steel shield notable over here. You could also pick up the combat stamina notable here that will grant additional life regeneration and armor. It is really up to you which one you prefer of the 2 clusters. And if you by this time instead just wanted more damage, I would recommend picking up Firewalker by going through this route, and then lastly Elemental Dominion for extra elemental damage and cast speed. And as I said, cast speed greatly improves the damage of Flame Totem, and increased elemental damage obviously does as well. And if you really wanted to try something entirely different, you could pick up these 3 knockback skill nodes down here. They will basically make your flame totem able to knock enemies away, which will make your totems indirectly tankier, as melee monsters would have a harder time hitting them. But that's up to you guys. For this build we are going to need some additional dexterity, so picking up the expertise notable might be a good idea as well if you're having trouble getting enough dexterity on your gear. And this can of course be done at any point in time of the build. You don't have to wait until the very late part of the game or late part of the build. And that's it for the skill tree, guys. Remember that if you by any point in time when following this build you start to feel like you lack HP or damage, you can of course just pick up skill nodes that improves this when you feel you need to. You don't have to follow my specific path or recommendations. As a matter of fact, I highly recommend you always pick up what you feel like based on the situation. What I just showed you should just be considered as a rough guideline for your own build. Okay, so let's talk briefly about how you should level this character until you can use your Flame Totem. And as I've said previously, Flame Totem requires you to be level 31 before you can start using it. The skill gem can be obtained by completing the first quest, Enemy at the Gate, the one where you need to kill Hillock outside of town in Act 1 on Cruel difficulty as a Marauder. The support gems such as Added Cares and Greater Multiple Projectiles can be obtained by completing the quest A Fixture of Fate, which is the library quest where you need to collect those pages. The Added Chaos gem is the quest reward for completing this quest on Cruel, and Greater multiple projectiles is awarded by completing this quest on Merciless. If possible, I would, however, recommend buying yourself a greater multiple projectiles as soon as you reach level 31. If you can't afford it at that time, you can instead buy a lesser multiple projectiles until you can either receive greater multiple projectiles from the quest or buy it when you can afford it. The Fire Penetration skill gem can be obtained by completing the Sever the Right Hand in Act 3, the one where you need to kill General Gravicious, and this is on normal difficulty. The Faster Casting skill gem will have to be bought or traded from another player, and it can usually be obtained for 1 alchemy or 1 chaos orb depending on the seller. Faster casting makes a big difference in your totem damage, so I would recommend getting this skill gem as soon as you can use it at level 31. And yeah, while Flame Totem on its own is very strong, I will recommend to you guys that if you pick up Ancestral Bond as soon as you reach level 31, as I did with this build, then I highly recommend having the 3 support gems, greater multiple projectiles or lesser multiple projectiles, Fire Penetration and Faster Casting ready to be linked as soon as you can use your Flame Totem. The added chaos damage is not necessary until you get yourself a 5-linked chest piece. And before you can use and obtain your Flame Totem quest reward from the Hillock quest on Cruel, I recommend leveling up with the 2-handed high physical damage weapon and the skill gem Molten Strike or Ground Sling. These skill gems can be obtained by completing the first quest of the game that involves killing Hillock on normal difficulty, and if you want you can add in Multi-Strike and Life Leech as support gems while leveling, but it isn't required. The most important thing is to use a 2-handed weapon with a high physical damage roll. After all, you only need to reach level 31 for the fun to begin. Now the last thing we're going to talk about is what kind of affixes and stats you should aim for on your gear for your character to make it as powerful as possible. Let's quickly summarize what this build needs to function. We of course want life and resistances so that we don't die. That is pretty self-explanatory. And to further improve our survivability, we want as much armor and block chains on our gear as possible. And to make sure that our flame will burn the brightest and deal the most damage, we want fire, spell or elemental damage on our gear. You probably already know this, but it is very important that you realize that being resistance capped when starting out in Merciless difficulty is mandatory. If you aren't by this time, you need to do what you can to get there, or at least get as close as possible, especially if playing on hardcore. Don't want to die, this is where the fun begins. When you are resistance capped, this is the stats in priority you should aim for when changing or upgrading your gear for your character. For defensive stats, you want life as the most important stat. You then want armor, block chains, strength as it provides HP as well, and lastly chaos resistance. Chaos resistance isn't too important, so don't spend a lot of currency to try to get that. It should just be considered as a nice additional bonus if you can afford it. And as a general advice for this build, I highly recommend that you try to get as much armor as possible on your shield. The shield is one of the absolutely most important pieces of gear you can invest into for this build, as we have skill nodes in the skill tree that directly increases the amount of additional armor and block chains we gain from our shield, and this is a substantial increase that we can get from this. Because of these skill nodes, the shield will become the major component of your defenses for this build. The offensive stats we want on our gear is pretty simple for this build. We basically want increased fire, spell or elemental damage, and it doesn't matter which one, just get as much as possible. And secondly, we want increased cast speed. We don't care about critical hit chains or critical hit multipliers, since this is not a crit build. And now, since greater multiple projectiles require 119 strength at level 20, and we don't pick up a lot of dexterity through the skill tree, I will highly recommend you guys to either craft or buy gear with some added dexterity on it. You don't need more than 119 though in total. For this build, I would also recommend that you get 2 Seething Life Flasks, 1 Iron Skin Granite Flask, a Quicksilver Flask, and either a Ruby, Topaz or Sapphire Flask depending on the content you're farming. try to roll staunching on at least one of the flasks. Staunching basically removes bleeding effects, and I usually try to roll that on my seething life flasks as an extra affix. If you want to invest some more currency into this build, I will in my forum post link to a few uniques and specific items that goes really well with this build. It is however not something that we're going to discuss in this video. And lastly, for the bandit quests, you should help Oak on normal difficulty for the extra HP and kill them all on both cruel and merciless difficulty to receive the 2 additional skill points. And that's it, guys. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them below in the comments or by going to my forum post on the Path of Exile forums. I will make sure to answer any questions that haven't already been answered in this video. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?